Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Greg Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reske.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
My favorite one, and I'm even torn right now, is probably the Prodigal Sons.
The Prodigal Sons,
and Keller. You know, I've heard the story of the Prodigal Sons. You know, my entire Christian life. In fact, God used that parable to help soften my heart and bring me to Jesus, because I realized I was like the younger son. But the big revelation in the Prodigal Sons that Keller does such a great job bringing out is that both sons were lost.
Yeah.
One was lost by being very, very bad, which is the one we always think of. But the other son, which we don't pay much attention to, was lost by being very, very good. They both wanted the father's things rather than the father himself. And it talked about breaking God's heart. They wanted his stuff. They didn't want the father.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Remember, Any thoughts on that one, Jim?
Oh, I do remember. Absolutely. I think it came out in 2005, and I remember listening to it because it was shocking. The first thing he says is, you always hear the story of the prodigal son, singular, because we always talk about the irreligious one, the one who goes off and I'm assuming most of our listeners can be familiar with the prodigal son story in Luke 15, where the son goes off and the son goes to the father and says, I want all my inheritance now, the younger brother, and give me my half of the inheritance now. And the father gives it to him, and the son wastes it all in wild living and then comes crawling back. Most people know that story. And Keller says, Jesus starts the story by saying a man had two sons. It doesn't say, let me tell you about the bad, irreligious son. A man had two sons. And just that, the fact alone that Keller brought out, like the stories about, yes, the irreligious way of life, but also the religious way of life. And they're both ways of being your own savior and avoiding the need for Jesus as savior, right? They're both ways, the irreligious and the religious. Follow your heart and follow the rules, right?
Right. Yeah. And that kind of, that's one of the illustrations that I use a lot is, Jesus crucified between two thieves, like on a hill, and the two thieves of the gospel that, and I call this the three ways to live, because, like you just said, one way is to follow your heart, like the younger son, or follow the rules like the older brother, or follow Jesus. And, like you said, there's different ways we can be lost. We can be lost in religion or irreligion. And one of the revelations I have is, I thought, why is that so attractive to follow the rules or just follow your heart? And I think it all has to do with the word control. Yes. We want to control our lives. And so you can control your life if you come up with a list of rules to follow, or you control your life by just following your heart. Yeah. But to follow Jesus is a life of surrender. And so, and the other big revelation I had with this sermon is that, we need to, obviously, the following Jesus is the way of salvation. But it's also the way of sanctification, because a lot of times in our sanctification, we tend to drift back to one of those thieves to try to live the Christian life. And that's part of being a gospel addict.
That's absolutely. Greg, I remember it's been a long time since I listened to this sermon as well. But I remember when Keller preached on this, the moment when he said, the younger son comes back crawling to the father, right? Practices his speech. I'm not worthy to be in your household. I just want to be a slave. And the son is saying, I don't want to relate to you the way I'm not worthy to relate to you the way a son relates to his father. I'm just going to be an obedient slave. Like I'm going to be
like one of your hired servants.
Right. That's the speech he prepares and that he gives to the father. And the father runs to the son, which would have been embarrassing for any, you know,
Yes. Because of the
respectable.
way they dress, they wouldn't run.
Right. I remember those little details. But
Yeah.
then Keller makes a big point about that the Bible includes the words, he runs the son and kissed him. And do you remember that? It's like it
Yeah.
was a big moment in the sermon. I go, wow. I remember that because he said the Bible doesn't have to say the father just that the father kissed him. The guy could have said it ran down the road. He embraced him, took him back in. He ran down the road and kissed him. The incredible affection and love the
Yes.
father has for the
Showing
wayward child.
the father is saying, I want a relationship with you.
And I don't want to relate to you just the way of
Yeah. In fact,
sort of.
I think Keller brings out the point that the younger son doesn't even have time to give it. He rehearses that speech, but he never
Hmm?
gives it because the
Oh,
father won't let him.
yeah, I don't want to hear it. Just come on in. I kiss you and then throw a big party, right?
He didn't need to.
The other haunting moment in that sermon was at the end when, and I never saw the text until Keller brought it out. That at the end there's a huge party and everyone is there, and the only one that's outside the party is the older brother.
Mm,
The older brother never comes in. The older brother is the one who says, so, all this time I've been loyal and faithful, and you didn't even give me a goat to share with my friends. Again, he doesn't want the father; he wants his stuff, right? Like you said.
yeah.
And the father says, "Yes, but your wayward son and his brothers come home." Someone else pointed out, I don't think it was in the Keller sermon. I don't remember, Greg, if it was in there or not, about why wasn't the older brother out looking for the younger brother? He had an obligation as older brother go looking, but he never did go out and look, right? So the younger brother left and he said, fine, who needs him? He just stayed and kept he was obedient, thinking if I just follow the rules, I get my share of the stuff too.
Yes.
Um, but that's a sidelight. The notion that he followed these rules, thought the father owed him something. I'm good, yeah, therefore you owe me. And so at the end of the day, he's not in the party. That was really haunting to me. It's the wayward son, the younger brother was in, but the older brother was out.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think that became the basis for the Prodigal God book, the Keller wrote.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Oh, for sure. For sure it
Yeah,
did. For
yeah.
sure it did. Um, yeah, that is one of my all-time favorites. And then
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.